Get ready, because the story you're about to see is so unbelievable, so full of twists, it'll leave you speechless. I snagged this bombshell from our entitled people, and believe me, it explodes. A hellish neighbor, a plumber with dark secrets, and a secret recording that exposes an extortion plot. Think you've seen it all? Think again. You won't believe what happened to Alice, the librarian who discovered that the dripping ceiling was the least of her problems. Grab your popcorn, because this hellish neighbor's revenge will leave you breathless. After all, the delivery guy knew too much. The water was dripping, not from the faucet, but from my ceiling. A thin but steady stream transforming my beautiful white plaster into a soggy abstract masterpiece. And I knew exactly who was to blame. Mrs. Gertrude, the upstairs neighbor, the supreme queen of complaints, and owner of a chihuahua with a bark capable of bringing down airplanes. Me, Alice, the librarian with thick glasses and a passion for Earl Grey tea, had never had an argument with Mrs. Gertrude. My strategy was peaceful ignorance. After all, who had the patience to deal with such an enraged creature who could find fault even in a sunset? But the dripping water was the limit. It was an invasion, an aggression against my inner peace and my newly purchased books. After several unsuccessful attempts to contact the superintendent, the man was as ineffective as a bagless vacuum cleaner, I decided to act. The solution seemed simple: call a plumber. And so I contacted Pure Water and SOS, famous for its efficiency and gossip. That I would discover later. The plumber, a young, smiling guy named Raphael, arrived on time with a smile that didn't match the scene of imminent destruction on my ceiling. He inspected the situation with the same seriousness an archaeologist would analyze an Egyptian sarcophagus. After a few minutes of investigation, Raphael pointed to the ceiling with the precision of a surgeon. "Faulty seal, Mrs. Alice, needs to be fixed urgently before the whole thing collapses." He started working, silently and efficiently, while I watched, a mixture of apprehension and hope in my eyes. During the service, Raphael, with disconcerting naturalness, blurted out, "You know, Mrs. Alice, Mrs. Gertrude is always complaining. About life, the noise, the birds, even my clothes. Said my t-shirt was too flashy for such an important job." He laughed, but a shiver ran down my spine. This guy knew too much. He continued with the work, but his words echoed in my ears. Did he know more than just Mrs. Gertrude's complaints? I wondered what else he had overheard in the building's hallways, what secrets the residents kept. I knew my upstairs neighbor was a difficult person, but the implication that the plumber was involved in something deeper left me uneasy. Raphael finished the job, and as I paid him, he said with an enigmatic smile, "Mrs. Alice, I recommend you keep an eye on Mrs. Gertrude. She's not as harmless as she seems." And then he left, leaving me with a repaired ceiling but with a growing sense of unease. I didn't know exactly what Raphael meant, but something was wrong. Very wrong. After all, what was Mrs. Gertrude hiding? That night, while I was having my Earl Grey tea, a loud noise came from upstairs. A scream, a crash, and then silence. A silence so deep and terrifying that my heart pounded in my chest. I needed to find out what was happening. But looking out the window, I saw something that left me completely paralyzed. A black car with tinted windows was parked in front of Mrs. Gertrude's building. Two tall, imposing men got out of the car and entered the building unhurriedly, with a sinister expression on their faces. My body became rigid as a salt statue. The Earl Grey tea cooled in the cup, forgotten in my trembling hands. Those men weren't police officers. They didn't have the upright posture and impeccable uniform of law enforcement officers. They were imposing, intimidating, like silent predators, ready to attack. A chilling premonition ran through me, a silent warning of imminent danger. My heart beat strongly in my chest, a frantic drum announcing a storm. "What's happening?" I whispered to myself, my voice hoarse and almost inaudible. The image of the men entering Mrs. Gertrude's building repeated itself in my mind, like a slow-motion film. And Raphael's phrase echoed, "She's not as harmless as she seems." Did he know? Was he involved? Millions of questions hammered my head, each one more terrifying than the last. I got up, hesitant, feeling a mixture of fear and curiosity pushing me. The need to discover the truth, to understand what was happening, was stronger than my self-preservation instinct. I grabbed my coat, my hands trembling as I buttoned it up. I needed to know. I needed to see. But what would I find? I armed myself. With my flashlight, an object so ineffective against possible dangers, but which gave me an illusion of safety. I went down the stairs with cautious steps, my heart pounding against my ribs. The silence of the building was oppressive, heavy, like a veil of mystery covering every corner. It was a silence that screamed. I arrived at the hallway of Mrs. Gertrude's floor, my heartbeat echoing in my ears like a hammer. Her apartment number was unlit, plunged into darkness. But through the crack of the door, a thin sliver of yellow light hit me. A light that seemed to tremble. I hesitated for a moment, fear paralyzing me. But curiosity, the thirst for answers, was stronger. I took a deep breath, trying to control the tremor in my hands. Slowly, I put my ear to the door, trying to catch any sound. A whisper, a moan, and then a dull thud. Absolute silence. My blood froze in my veins. Something was terribly wrong. With a sharp movement, I turned the doorknob. The door was unlocked, and hesitantly, I opened it slowly, the faint light from the hallway illuminating the scene before my eyes. A scene that left me paralyzed, the air escaping my lungs in a silent scream of horror. In the center of the room, on the floor, lay Mrs. Gertrude, and on top of her, one of the men from the black car with a knife in his hand and a cold, cruel smile on his face. And then he saw me. His eyes, cold and implacable, met mine, and before I could react, he turned to me, the knife gleaming in the dim light, and said in a calm and menacing voice, "Well, Alice, it seems you've discovered a secret you shouldn't have." The air froze. The knife, a deadly reflection under the faint light, seemed to hover between me and death. The man, imposing and frightening, emanated an aura of danger that paralyzed me. Mrs. Gertrude's body, inert on the floor, was a dark stain on the already faded carpet. The scene was brutal, grotesque, and the metallic smell of blood invaded my nostrils, suffocating me. My scream died in my throat, replaced by a silent sob of terror. My short-circuited brain tried to process the information. Mrs. Gertrude, the grumpy old woman, dead? And this man, a cold and calculating murderer? The image of Raphael, the plumber, and his enigmatic words returned to my mind with force. He knew. He had warned me. But what did he know? And why didn't he warn me more clearly? A whirlwind of emotions hit me. Fear, panic, anger, disbelief. I wanted to scream, run, disappear, but my legs were as heavy as lead. The only possible reaction was the paralysis of fear. The man took a step towards me, and the gleam of the steel blade intensified, reflecting the yellowish light of the hallway. My gaze swept across the room, searching for an escape, a weapon, anything that could save me. But there was nothing. Only death, Mrs. Gertrude, and the implacable murderer who stared at me. My heart beat like a frantic drum, each beat a silent scream of terror. The gasping breath filled the oppressive silence. "You're next, Alice," he said, his voice soft, but laden with a deadly threat. The coldness in his expression caused me an even greater shiver than the sharp blade. He wasn't joking. He was determined. Suddenly, a loud noise, a crash from the street, broke the deadly silence. The murderer stopped, his eyes narrowing towards the window. An opportunity? A chance to escape? My body, still paralyzed by fear, reacted instinctively. I needed to think fast, very fast. He turned, the knife still in his hand, his eyes fixed on the window. It was the moment. With a surge of adrenaline I didn't know I had, I threw myself on him, trying to disarm him. A brutal fight began, a whirlwind of blows and screams. The knife slipped from his hand, falling to the floor with a metallic clink. But he was stronger, much stronger. In the confusion of the fight, I managed to push him, causing him to lose his balance. He fell, hitting his head hard on the corner of the coffee table. A scream, a thud, silence. Was he unconscious? Dead? I was trembling, breathless, my body aching and covered in scratches. But was I free? For now, yes. I looked at the murderer's body, my heart still pounding in my chest. But then something caught my attention. A small metallic object, gleaming under the table between the fallen man's feet. A small recorder. A recorder with a flashing red light, still recording, and on it, a small speaker, transmitting the sound of Mrs. Gertrude's voice. A calm, cold voice, explaining a plan. A plan that involved much more than just a faulty seal, a plan that would leave me completely petrified. And then, the door opened, revealing two more men, identical to the first, their implacable faces and eyes fixed on me. The red light of the recorder blinked, and I knew my time was running out. Very, very much running out. The recorder continued to blink, a pulsating red light that seemed to mock my terror. Mrs. Gertrude's raspy, sibilant voice echoed through the small speaker, describing a plan so complex and cruel that my brain refused to process it completely. It spoke of debts, threats, a conspiracy involving more people than I could ever imagine. It was a web of lies, betrayals, and murders, with her at the center, a cold and calculating orchestrator. The image of the grumpy old woman, whom I had always considered just annoying, crumbled before my eyes, revealing a sinister and implacable figure. My body trembled uncontrollably, a mixture of adrenaline and terror paralyzing me. Mrs. Gertrude's voice, even recorded, carried a palpable threat, a sinister presence that froze me to the bone. I was trapped in a deadly trap, surrounded by professional killers who seemed as impassive as marble statues. The knife fallen on the floor, a symbol of my temporary escape, was a cruel reminder of my fragility. They didn't know I recorded everything. I thought, a thread of hope, as thin as a hair emerging from the despair. Mrs. Gertrude planned everything, she used me, and now they're going to silence me. The two men who entered, identical to the first, approached slowly, their heavy steps echoing in the silent room. Their implacable faces left no doubt. They weren't there for a friendly chat. They were predators, and I was their prey. The red light of the recorder pulsed, like a sinister heart beating in unison with my own, frantic and terrified. I tried to get up, but my legs wobbled, refusing to obey me. My whole body ached, every muscle screaming in protest from the brutal fight I had just experienced. But I needed to react, I needed to fight. Survival depended on it. The survival of everyone involved in this macabre plan. I looked around, searching for some form of defense, something that could give me a chance, however small. My eyes fixed on a heavy metal ashtray near the fireplace. It was heavy, solid, capable of causing some damage. It was a chance. A desperate chance, but the only one I had. With superhuman effort, I dragged myself to the ashtray, grabbing it tightly. The coldness of the metal against my trembling hands gave me an illusion of power, a small spark of hope amidst the abyss. of despair. The two men were a few steps from me, their eyes shining with a terrifying coldness. It was now or never. I stared at them, my gaze fixed on their implacable eyes. My whole body trembled, but my mind was focused. I needed to survive. I needed to expose the truth. The truth that was recorded on that small recorder. The truth that Mrs. Gertrude had tried so hard to hide. The men advanced, and I prepared for the attack. I raised the ashtray, ready to use all my strength, all my anger, all my will to survive. But before I could react, one of the men gestured, and the other stopped. One of them bent down, picking something up from the floor, something that made me freeze again, my blood freezing in my veins. It was a second recorder, identical to the first but with a flashing green light, a recorder I hadn't seen before. And as he got up, with a cruel smile on his lips, he said, "It seems you're not the only one recording secrets, Alice." And then he pressed a button on the recorder, and a familiar voice echoed through the room. The voice of Raphael, the plumber, revealing a much deeper and more terrifying secret. A secret that would leave me completely speechless and about to face a fate even worse than death. Raphael's voice, smooth and treacherous, echoed through the room, cutting the tense silence like a sharp knife. It was his voice, but it wasn't. The smiling and seemingly harmless Raphael I knew. It was a cold, calculated voice, revealing a dark and disturbing side that I could never have imagined. He spoke of a much larger conspiracy, a plan that went beyond the death of Mrs. Gertrude, a plan that involved me directly and that left me completely petrified. My legs gave way, throwing me back to the floor. The metal ashtray slipped from my hands, falling with a metallic clang that seemed to echo the despair that invaded me. The image of the three imposing men, dark silhouettes against the dim light of the hallway, dominated me. Raphael's voice, cold and precise, described a dirty game, a game in which I was just a pawn, unaware that I had been manipulated from the beginning. "Mrs. Alice," Raphael's voice echoed, each word like a sure blow. "You thought you were one step ahead, didn't you? That you unmasked Mrs. Gertrude and her conspiracy." He laughed, a dry and cruel laugh that echoed through the room. "What naivete!" Two men approached, their faces implacable, their eyes full of a frightening coldness. I tried to get up, but my body refused to obey, heavy, paralyzed by terror. The recording continued, revealing cruel details, unexpected connections, that placed me at the center of a web of lies and murders. I was a fundamental piece in this plan, but I didn't know what my role was. The recording detailed a racketeering scheme, a network of corruption involving influential figures in the city, with Mrs. Gertrude as an important piece, but not the mastermind. Raphael, the seemingly harmless plumber, was the mastermind, the conductor of this macabre orchestra, and I, unknowingly, was being used as bait. My blood ran cold. I wasn't just in danger. I was part of a much bigger crime than I could have ever imagined. "You've become a problem, Mrs. Alice," Raphael's voice continued in the recording. "An unwanted witness. Someone needs to silence you before you reveal too much." The two men came closer, their shadows enveloping me like a deadly embrace. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my throat, only a silent sob of terror. The recording continued, revealing Raphael's final plan, to frame me for the death of Mrs. Gertrude and everyone involved in the scheme, so that he could escape unpunished. The red light of Mrs. Gertrude's recorder and the green light of Raphael's recorder blinked in unison like two black hearts beating in sync, marking my death sentence. I was surrounded, with no way out, no hope. It was the end. Or would it be? Suddenly, a violent crash shook the building, followed by a series of screams and gunshots. The noise seemed to be coming from the street, but it was difficult to be sure. My brain was short-circuiting, processing the information in slow motion. The three men stopped. their expressions becoming tense, their eyes narrowing towards the window. The opportunity, the chance to escape, appeared suddenly and unexpectedly. Taking advantage of the distraction, I threw myself to the side, rolling on the floor, trying to escape the reach of the murderers. They turned, their faces towards the window, but I was already getting up with a clear goal in mind. Mrs. Gertrude's recorder. I needed it. I needed the proof. I ran towards the coffee table, my lungs burning, my legs trembling, but my mind focused. I grabbed the recorder, squeezing it tightly, feeling the cold metal against my fingers. It was my only weapon, my only hope. But as I got up, ready to run, I saw something that froze me in place. A fourth man wearing a police uniform entered through the door, pointing a gun directly at my head. He smiled, a cold and calculating smile. "Sorry, Alice," he said, "but Raphael paid me well to make sure you didn't tell anyone about the recorder. He knew you would find Mrs. Gertrude's, but he didn't expect to find mine." And then, before I could react or even breathe, he said, he also didn't expect me to be recording everything from the beginning. And with a click of the gun's safety, the red light of Mrs. Gertrude's recorder went out. The green light of Raphael's recorder blinked for the last time, and everything went dark. The darkness was total, a vacuum that swallowed the sound, the fear, the very breath. The click of the gun's safety echoed in my mind, a final and definitive blow. I was lying on the cold floor, Raphael's recording interrupted, his macabre plan interrupted. The weight of the metal ashtray, still in my hands, was the only physical reminder of the fight that had just happened. A deafening silence descended upon the apartment, a silence that screamed the absence of life, the absence of hope. But then, the siren. A distant but persistent sound that tore through the deadly silence like a cry of liberation. Blue and red lights twinkled through the window, breaking the oppressive darkness. The door was broken down, and a police force invaded the apartment, their weapons pointed in every direction. The policeman who had pointed the gun at me was immobilized, without reaction, trapped in the cold embrace of steel. Raphael, the plumber, was on the floor, his hand resting on a small green recorder, now off. The other men, equally immobilized, were like wax statues, their implacable faces frozen in an expression of defeat. I was alive. Unbelievably, I was alive. The days that followed were a whirlwind of interrogations, testimonies, and the constant feeling of unreality. Raphael's recording, recovered intact, revealed the extent of his criminal scheme, a conspiracy involving large-scale corruption, extortion, and murder. The recording of the policeman, a corrupt officer on Raphael's payroll, brought to light a network of corruption that would shake the city to its foundations. And Mrs. Gertrude's recording, the key piece in Raphael's plan, detailed a story of blackmail, threats, and a dark past that had transformed her into the implacable figure I had known. Justice, finally, was being done. Raphael, the corrupt policeman, and the other men were arrested. The conspiracy was unraveled, the truth exposed. I, the librarian with thick glasses and a passion for Earl Grey tea, had become an unlikely heroine, a key witness in a case that would shock the nation. My life changed forever, but I survived. I was alive and free. But the image of Mrs. Gertrude, inert on the floor, and the cold gaze of the policeman still haunted me. The feeling of fragility, the vulnerability I had felt in that apartment, remained, a tight knot in my stomach. The memory of the flashing red and green lights, the recorders as silent witnesses to a horrendous crime, was a recurring nightmare that disturbed me on the most peaceful nights. So read it? Was I the heroine? Or just a pawn in a game much bigger than I could imagine? And most importantly, will I ever be able to truly forget the sound of the flashing red and green lights? Guys, I'm completely speechless. The audacity of these people, Unbelievable. I'm still processing everything. But seriously, did you believe this twist? Let me know in the comments what you thought. Were you as shocked as I was? Tell me everything. If you made it this far, thank you so much. And if you enjoyed this video, please drop a huge like. It helps me so much to keep bringing you these incredible stories. And if you're not subscribed yet, you're missing out. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any new videos because we've got a ton of drama to show you. Share this video with your friends. Let's spread this unbelievable story around the world. See you next time, and prepare your hearts because there's much more craziness coming. Bye.